Great. Let's start again with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And let's do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then Refuge in Bodhicitta, first time in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki chanyan gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shom. All right, as usual, we'll do a short meditation, just spending a few minutes focusing the mind using the breath, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation together. So let's just go ahead and begin our meditation. Now let's set our motivation for tonight. And I thought it would be useful to go back to one of the topics we discussed last week. The last one, again, all of these remaining topics all have to do with kind of an extension of the topic of manifestation. This one was the presentation on pervasion, that suchness, emptiness, pervades the minds of all beings, whether we're in the developmental stage or whether we've accomplished complete enlightenment. The suchness pervades each and every mind. And recall the analogy that was used of space. Space being the absence of obstructive contact. And space exists everywhere, but it's a mere absence. It is what allows for the clay vessel, the copper vessel, the gold vessel, all to occupy that space. And there's a difference qualitatively between those three. The inferior clay vessel, the kind of middle quality copper vessel, and the supreme quality of gold. Just as there is a difference between the minds of ordinary beings, the minds of those who have achieved a realization of emptiness but have not yet actualized complete enlightenment, and then the minds of the Buddhas who have accomplished all realizations, who have developed all the qualities to the greatest degree and removed everything that obscures the mind. But again, the suchness of these three minds is the same. This reinforces the idea that our minds do improve. Even when we look at our own minds, the minds of us as ordinary beings, we can see how much we've changed since we met the Buddha Dharma. How through continued, sustained practice, study, reflection, our minds are developing. We're moving in the direction of buddhahood. Eventually, we will become that middle quality vessel, become an Arya, have that direct realization. And then we will, through continuing on the path, developing our minds, accumulating merit, developing our wisdom, we will eventually attain buddhahood. All of that progress is made within the sphere of emptiness, within the negation of inherent existence that pervades all of these minds and the minds of all beings. So develop bodhicitta within that understanding, the recognition that it is possible, therefore, for ourselves to develop our minds to the greatest degree to become a Buddha. But we do that because we know that all beings have the same potential. They have the natural potential, the emptiness of their minds, and then they have the developmental potential, the ability for the mind to increase in its qualities and diminish the obstructions, the negative tendencies. So we dedicate ourselves to helping others to accomplish the goal of Buddhahood. And within the recognition that we have to become a Buddha ourselves to accomplish that. And hold that motivation of bodhicitta very deeply in your heart, so that everything that we do tonight becomes a cause for that result. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. So I did want to make just one little comment that Stephen had brought up last time. We had that without error and without elaboration to refer to the Buddhas, whereas with error and then without error and then finally without error and elaboration. And most of the commentaries I went to, mentioned the conception of inherent existence as being the elaboration, because that's how we usually talk about it. But as we said last week, when I was answering this, there are some commentaries that mention, in addition, the elaboration of phenomena that happens through the imprints on our minds that are the knowledge obstructions that give rise to a false appearance of inherent existence, which again is removed when you reach Buddhahood. But I did want to share one book. This is actually the book that there is a full commentary on this text that was published not that recently, but within the last 10 years or so, which is called Buddha Nature by Jamgon Kongtrul. Taye, I think. Anyway, this is I want to go ahead and put this on the screen, the two little passages that are from the Kindle version of that. And this is where he's commenting on that particular topic of manifestation, that a Tathagata has abandoned the two veils. Therefore, it manifests as it is in accordance with reality in an unperverted way. That means, without any error, and as freedom from any conceptual elaboration. So he talks about conceptual elaboration here. But then when you go to this annotations at the back, where you get more contemporary commentary, it says that freedom from conceptual elaboration is the state of peace in which all thoughts have subsided. So again, this is another way that we can talk about elaboration as elaboration referring to all conceptuality, not just the conceptions of inherent existence that, of course, we're all still struggling with and needing to remove. That's the afflictive obstructions, not just the elaborations of the appearance of inherent existence, which arises from the knowledge obstructions, but the fact that in Buddhahood, the mind is pacified of all conceptuality. As I mentioned before, the Buddhas don't wake up every day and go, what should I do? Well, let me think about it. There's no thinking. They're just spontaneously manifesting for the benefit of others. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because it adds a little bit more perhaps to what we were talking about last time. So tonight we're going to move into the topic of immutability. Let me go ahead and get this started. Whoops, I actually do want to start with the slides. I think that's better. Immutability, I mentioned last week that there's quite a long section on this, and I struggled with it a little bit. I didn't have tons and tons of time here at my mom's, and so I redid the outline that I used the last time I taught it, and I think that's probably going to be good enough for us to refer to. And of course, I've gone through and weeded out the commentary a little bit so that we don't have to maybe get caught up in too much of the detail, the woods, whatever. So we'll see how it works. But let me put on the slides, which again gives us an introduction to this topic by looking at the commentary by Geshe Acharya Thupten Lodin. I'm sorry, I'm going to start with Geshe Sonam Rinchen. I forgot I added these two, a couple of slides for this. Again, this is a book by Geshe Sonam Rinchen called Buddha Nature that's only really available in some form of PDF format somewhere out there. I think you can find hard copies used somewhere. I actually did find one, but the ninth point, immutability, indicates that throughout this progression that I was just talking about, moving through these three states, the identity of suchness remains immutable. As has been said, the emptiness of an ordinary being's mind is no different in nature from that of an exalted being, meaning an Arya, superior, or of one thus gone. That's the translation of Tathagata. When enlightenment is attained, no change has taken place in the nature of the mind's emptiness. And so it is referred to as immutable reality. So what we're talking about with immutability is the unchangingness of it, not in the way that we normally talk about permanent phenomena, not changing moment by moment. We mean that there's no kind of huge change from the mind of an ordinary being to the mind of an Arya to the mind of a Buddha in terms of its final nature, its emptiness. In terms of the mind, yes, of course there are changes, because otherwise we'd have a Buddha's mind right now, because it'd be equivalent to ordinary being's mind would be equivalent to that. So let's go on, and this kind of just explains and gets us into the topic of immutability. One might question this point, why is this coming up? In other words, because the reality of the minds of ordinary beings and that of exalted beings other than Buddhas is called reality with flaws, with errors, right? We saw that earlier. It still has some errors, even though Aryas are without the error in terms of they have realized emptiness directly. They still have flaws. They still have the afflictive obstructions, no doubt, and certainly they have the knowledge obstructions if they, are on those grounds of the Bodhisattva path of meditation, the pure grounds. So it says, while that of an enlightened being is referred to as reality with the quality of being free from flaws. So again, wherever we are at in our progression, until we become a Buddha, we have kind of suchness with faults, suchness with those flaws. And then when we become a Buddha, there's the suchness or the reality with the quality of being free from flaws, being free again, as we saw last time, from elaboration. So he goes on to say, this distinction, however, poses no problem because the mind has these flaws in a temporary way. which means they can be eliminated. Again, that's the other side of this that we're looking at in this course, not just the clear light nature of the mind, that it lacks inherent existence, it has that suchness, that emptiness throughout all these stages and so on, but also that the defilements are adventitious. The next sentence, it also has the potential for developing all the qualities of enlightenment. So we have these two things, eliminating all the faults, developing all the qualities. The focal point for developing these marvelous qualities is the very nature that the mind possesses, as we've been talking about throughout these 10 presentations, is that the emptiness of the mind is what allows for this process to occur. Neither the flaws nor even the good qualities in any way affect or change the mind's fundamental nature, its emptiness of inherent existence. Just as the ocean everywhere has the same taste, all phenomena, where their fundamental nature is concerned, have the same taste because ultimate truth will never be anything but the emptiness of inherent existence. So he uses the example of an ocean and the taste of the ocean always being salty wherever you taste, ocean water. But the idea is that, again, that emptiness is identical regardless of whatever good qualities might be there, whatever faults or flaws might exist. Now let's go to Geshe Acharya Thupten Loden and his book, Fundamental Potential for Enlightenment. And we're just going to look at the intro verse that we're going to be starting with when we get into this verse 50. This is his commentary on that verse. The mind is empty of inherent existence during one, we're going to see these three repeated again, the stage of an ordinary being. This is what we've been seeing throughout this whole topic of manifestation and the subdivisions of it in these last few presentations. And also two, during the stage of superior hearers and solitary realizers and superior bodhisattvas. So anyone who is an Arya being who has that direct realization, but yet is still on the learning path. In terms of the, this would be in terms of the Mahayana, that they'd be learner bodhisattvas, learner superiors, but you could still be a hearer and solitary realizer, that it's an arhat, but technically you're kind of still on the learning path because you haven't accomplished the path of no more learning of the Mahayana. So their mind, again, for those first two, is empty of inherent existence, even though, again, we call that Buddha nature, Buddha lineage, and it's still developing in that direction, as is the mind, the third one, at the stage of a Buddha. So all three are empty of inherent existence. The suchness of the mind, or the mind's actual mode of existence, is the mere absence of inherent existence, and this remains its unchanging reality during the three stages of ordinary being, learner, superior being, and Buddha. So again, when you get to the final goal of Buddhahood, it's the same empty nature of the mind as it was on the learning path when you were still dealing with Buddha nature. A difference is therefore not seen in the suchness of the mind of an ordinary sentient being, a superior hearer or solitary realizer or a superior bodhisattva, or lastly, a Buddha. Of course, I inserted that he didn't have that there, but he does mention it in the next sentence in terms of the level of development that has occurred. Rather, a distinction can be made on the basis of whether there is first temporary obscuration, that's for ordinary beings, complete, maybe I got it wrong when I copied this from there, complete or partial obscuration of the nature of the mind by the adventitious defilements. I guess maybe temporary, complete. What I was thinking when I put the three there was that it was complete freedom from, so I'd have to change that. Sorry, I'll have to go back and take a look at that. I guess, again, that's why he didn't have Buddha in the third one. Sorry, I was misreading that when I read it. I thought it was saying complete purity. So, okay, so let's leave off this number 3 here, everything that's in brackets, and let's get rid of the number 3 down there. So essentially we have two different levels of obscuration that occur. Temporary and complete, which would be again for a ordinary being who hasn't begun the path, or partial obscuration would be for the Arya beings who have. So I hope you got what I meant by that. But essentially we have two different levels of obscuration that could be there. When you get to a Buddha, of course, you have no obscuration. I'll change this and I'll send that to Venerable Dundruk to replace the one that is out there, so you have a final one. There's actually one other thing I need to change that I noticed. So again, what we're dealing with in this is kind of a very similar subject to what we've been seeing in manifestation, but it's looking at it from the point of view of the unchanging nature of the suchness compared to the changing nature of the mind that goes through these stages of development. So let's go to the chart now. Again, I'm kind of doing this, going back and forth between these. In terms of the chart, we have, this is again page 6 of the charts that are in the first part of the charts from the basic program in Italy, ILTK. So we see that in the far right column, we get kind of, again, the purpose for this. Immutable does not mean that the mind does not change, but means that the nature of the mind does not change. The nature of the mind always remains as it is, whether the stains have not been removed at all, whether the stains have been partially removed, and whether the stains have been completely removed. So I was thinking it said removed when I was editing that slide and putting in those brackets. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have these 3 different states that are over in the second column then. These 3 states of an ordinary being, Arya Bodhisattvas. Again, by Arya Bodhisattvas, as we saw in previous commentary, we would include the Aryas of the Hearer and Solitary Realizer lineage, and even, of course, the Arhats, because they still have some level of obscuration. But then the third one is to distinguish the Arya Buddhas, those beings who are actually free of all obscuration, would have a final category of complete removal of those obscurations. So then in terms of how it is immutable, we're going to go into this with regard to the verses. It's not as clear when we look at the outline and we kind of try to line this all up. But essentially, when they put together this chart, they identified 3 main ways that we could talk about how the Tathagata essence, Buddha nature, is immutable during the impure state. So the impure state is the first, related to the ordinary beings. We are going to see a second section dealing with what's called the both impure and pure state, meaning there's kind of both some level of purity and some level of impurity, and then finally the pure state, which would be Buddhahood. I'll show you the outline for that in a moment, but this is the first section that deals with the impure state. This is going to be verses 51 through 64, quite a number of verses. I hope I can get through all of these tonight. It is, first of all, not tainted by afflictions. It can even include in their karma and afflictions, as we see in our outline often, meaning that karma and afflictions, although they exist in the mind, they don't in any way pollute the suchness of the mind. Secondly, it is not destroyed. You cannot destroy the suchness of the mind, although, of course, certain elements of the mind can be destroyed and so on. And it is not born. As you go through various existences and you have a new sort of level of consciousness that might be born in another existence, another state, all of that happens within the mind itself, but it does not affect the suchness of the mind. So we see a short explanation of that in regard to each of these 3. First of all, that it's not tainted by the afflictions. It says there in this next column, where it says correspondence with simile, that suchness is permanent and is not altered by afflictions in its entirety. Suchness is not an afflicted phenomenon, since afflictions do not observe it, nor are they concomitant with it, since suchness is not a mind, right? Because only afflictions are concomitant with minds. They're not concomitant with suchness. Emptiness is a permanent phenomenon. It is not the mind, though it is the nature of the mind. So again, we have this lack of any sort of afflictions in terms of suchness, and it's not obscured in any way by it. The next point under that, the way suchness is obscured by afflictions is in the manner of the mind not being able to see, being obscured by them, and therefore not being able to see suchness. So again, this is how we talk about the mind being afflicted, but suchness is not afflicted. We say it's suchness with defilement, suchness with stain, because the mind has stain. So you have the emptiness of the mind that is together with stain. Whereas again, we'll see that the minds change as we go into the other 2 states. Number 2, this is related to the topic of it not being destroyed, that this Tathagata essence, in terms of the naturally abiding lineage, the suchness of the mind is not destroyed. Number 2 says, just as the universe is destroyed by fire at the end of the eon, the aggregates are destroyed by the fire of aging. And just as space is not destroyed by that fire, likewise, the suchness of the mind is not destroyed by the fires of aging, sickness, and death. So regardless of what is happening within the mind of that being, whatever is occurring, the sufferings that are happening and so on, and the aggregates being destroyed, as it says here, like your body being destroyed as you go on to another existence and what have you, the suchness stays the same. Destruction does not happen with regard to the suchness. The suchness continues on with the mind that is the basis for that. Number 3, this is related to the third point of it's not born. You don't have like a newly born suchness. As it says here, the earth element arises from the water element and that from the wind element. This is talking about how the evolution of the elements occurs according to Buddhist cosmology. And this is all based on the fact that uncompounded space, this absence of obstructive contact, allows for that arising to occur, while space itself remains unaltered. So he's talking about kind of what occurs in the arising of worlds being born and things coming into existence. They arise from within space. And this process of these 3 elements that are going to be likened to elements or things involved with this process of taking rebirth within samsara, arising into another existence. So this continues on the next page in that same column. It says, likewise, the aggregates arise from karma and afflictions. This is what's likened to the earth, which arise from the incorrect mental engagement of the conception of true existence. Actually, karma and afflictions is likened to the wind, I think. And no, I'm sorry, the water. And then the wind is likened to the incorrect mental engagement. And then the actual suffering that occurs is likened to the earth. We'll see this when we get into the actual verses. So it says this mental engagement, incorrect mental engagement, is the conception of true existence, which again is the root problem. This is likened to the wind that arises within space, that is sort of the basis for then water, and then water being the basis for earth. It says that, and that in turn arises based on the fact that the nature of suchness allows for that arising. Yet suchness itself remains unaltered. Whatever is going on in this arisal of the aggregates, just like in the arisal of the various elements within space, there's no real change in space itself. There's no real change in suchness or emptiness. All of this is occurring within these. So again, this is going to get clearer as we go through the text. So again, what I've done, and the handout that I gave to Venerable Dundrup to post, which you all have access to now, is like a 3-page handout that is an outline of the verses. It's kind of helpful to see them all on one page. I mean, for what we have 2 different versions of the text. Again, the one that's just the verses, but you still have to go through page by page to kind of line up the outline. And then we have the one that we've been working with. It's the commentary that we'll go to shortly. So what I've done in putting this together is I've just used the verse numbers with these outline headings so that we can get an idea of the overall structure of this part of the text. All right. So again, we're going to start with verse 150. That is what I just began with in terms of Geshe Loden's commentary. And we'll go to the actual commentary from Gyaltsab. And then we have the description of each of these categories, the individual explanations, which, as I said, again, is divided into 3 parts. The first part is immutable during the impure state. It's verses 51 through 64. And I did a yellow highlight on the section that has the actual verse. Some of these have a larger outline that covers multiple verses. And so this is where you would find each of these discussed. So if we look at it, we see that we have 2 main headings here, if you will, for this. We have number 1, unchanged by karma and affliction, creators of the aggregates. So all of this kind of pertains to that. But what's kind of interesting is we still do discuss within this birth and destruction. So it's not a clear lining up of these outlines with that, because even when you get down to the last outline at the bottom of the page there, it says unchanged by old age, etc., destroyer of the aggregates and likened to fire. That seems to be applicable to the one that we discussed in terms of destruction, but we didn't. Birth is kind of embedded within this. So it's going to be kind of hard to delineate it exactly according to the outline, but nonetheless, I'm going to respect the outline this time and kind of leave that intact, and we'll work from the outline to just kind of fit everything into this. So this is, again, what we just looked at from the presentation 9 on that chart for the first part in terms of the impure state. Let me just give you a brief preview of these, but though we'll talk about them more when we get to them. The next one is immutable during what is called here the impure and pure state, which it doesn't mean that there's kind of two different things going on here. There's in terms of some that are impure, some that are pure. We're talking about individuals who have some level of impurity still, but they have also developed some level of purity. This is going to mostly talk about the Arya Bodhisattvas again, who have developed a freedom from being under the control of karma and delusions in terms of their taking rebirth, but nonetheless, they still continue to take rebirth in regard to compassion for sentient beings and needing to develop their minds into buddhahood. So this is the second outline. Then the third outline is immutable during the pure state. This is where we're going to talk about the mind of a Buddha and so on, and the purity that is there and so on. So again, we'll get to that when we get to that, but I just wanted to give you a brief outline of this. So in terms of the verses that we're going to look at tonight, again, we'll start with verse 50, and then we might come back to this outline here and there just to see, make sure kind of where we're at in regard to that. So let's go to Gyaltsab J's commentary. This is page 133. As it says there, you got a link from the previous topic. It says, this begins, although the Tathagata basic element dwells in these three states. And then it goes on to talk about the 14 verses, refers to da-da-da-da. Let's go to the next paragraph where it actually gives kind of the same thing that I just went through in regard to these various outlines. It's going to show the verses that refer to each of the particular sections. Of the following verses of root text, there's one verse that summarizes all three states. That's verse 150 that we're going to look at next. Then there are, in regard to the impure state, there are 12 root-like verses, which are 51 through 62, and 2 commentary-like verses on the first state, again, the impure state. So that's 51 through 64, again, that we're going to cover tonight. One root-like verse, verse 165, that pertains to the second of these, the second state, the impure and pure state, and then 12 commentary-like verses, which are verses 166 through 77. Then there will be for the third state, the pure state, the one root text verse 78, and then 6 commentary-like verses on the third state. Therefore, there are 35 verses on the topic of immutability. Again, these line up with what that chart that I made for you that kind of gives a summary of the various outlines. Let's go to verse 150. Because of having adventitious faults and being naturally endowed with qualities, as in the earlier, so in the later states, it is in its true nature of being changeless. So the commentary says, just as emptiness by nature exists in the mind of ordinary beings, likewise in the later states of the hearer and solitary realizer Aryas, the Bodhisattva Aryas, and the totally pure state, the third one. So again, we have all three delineated there. Ordinary sentient beings and all these Arya beings who are, again, still not Buddhas. And then finally the Arya Buddha who has the totally pure state. It remains as suchness, which is the mere negation of existence by its own nature. Just as it exists in the third state, so it was in the first and second state. Therefore, it is an unchanging suchness. And as Geshe-Sona mentioned, said, this is important because we see the mind going through a process of change. The development of the mind does occur, but the suchness remains the same through all of this. Then the commentary that follows, as you may ask, if the first two states are with fault and the third state is without fault and endowed with excellent qualities, then how can it be claimed that the latter exists in the same way as the former? Because it's conventionally, yes, the mind has changed. There's no contradiction here. The faults are adventitious in that they can be removed, and every quality of the Buddha can be developed. And the focus for development of these qualities exists innately. This is what Geshe-Sona mentioned was calling kind of that focus for all of that to occur being the naturally abiding lineage, the suchness of the mind. Therefore, the mere negation of existence by way of its own nature cannot be changed by the faults, nor can it be altered by the qualities also. Because just as every drop of water is one taste with the ocean, this is where Geshe Sono Rinchen got that. Again, it's not full-fledged simile or analogy, but it's used here to refer to the taste of emptiness that pervades all of these phenomena. So every phenomenon is of one taste within natural emptiness. Therefore, the ultimate truth cannot take any form other than the mere negation of existence by way of its own nature. Form is maybe not the right word because it doesn't have a physical form, but we mean it cannot be talked about in being anything but the mere negation of existence by way of its own nature, inherent existence. Moreover, when cognized in the meditative equipoise of every Arya being, it abides in that state and does not differ in form from the slightest, in the slightest. So again, what is realized by any Arya being and by the Buddha in their terms of their meditative equipoise on emptiness is the same suchness. There's no difference in what is realized. That is the meaning of immutability. Whereas the assertion of a permanent functional phenomenon does not belong to the tradition of this Dharma. Again, kind of referring to something we've seen previously earlier that had to do with, this permanent functional phenomenon. And Geshe Jumpa Gyaltsen said that, he thought that there was maybe even in the Vaibhashikas some sub-schools that hold to this idea again of a permanent and yet functional phenomenon, which is contradictory according to most of the schools of Buddhism. But nonetheless, it's not a big point. It's just kind of saying again that whoever might try to posit some sort of changeability, that this is not what we hold, that we hold that it is immutable, that it doesn't change in any way through those. So these are in the 14 verses. The 14th verse explains that in the totally pure state, from the perspective of their nature and of being separable, the qualities are indivisible and inseparable. I'm not sure what this is talking about because, again, we have 14 verses for the first part, but we're not really talking about the pure state in the first part. So I didn't really pick up on what that was about there. But let's go on to the first section, immutable during the impure state. This begins with the question, what are the 12 verses that begin the teaching of immutability in the impure state? Again, we have the 2 additional ones that are said to be kind of an additional, what was it, the way they explained it? They are commentary-like verses, 12 root-like verses, and then 2 commentary-like verses. So we start off with the 12 that kind of give an explanation of this. We see again that there's the 2 headings that we had that were talked about, that were on our chart that I prepared for this section on immutability. Unchanged by karma and affliction, creators of the aggregates, and then unchanged by old age, etc., the destroyer of the aggregates. And these are where they're likened to fire. As fire can consume a whole world system, but the space is unchanged. In the same way, we can have the fire of these various sufferings that occur, but we never destroy the suchness of the mind. So this first starts out with a presentation on root texts, untainted by the phenomena of mental afflictions, and then untainted by birth and destruction that are caused by the mental afflictions. Because again, the afflictions rooted in ignorance are what give rise to the sufferings of samsara. Verse 51 says, just as the all-pervading space is subtle and therefore untainted by faults, in the same way, this state in all sentient beings is not altered by karma and afflictions. Whoops, sorry, somehow hit a button there. Go back up. So again, it says sentient beings, but again, we can say the suchness pervades all sentient beings, but we're talking here about sentient beings who are still quite together with all the faults, the impure state of these beings. And it's not altered, although their minds are altered by karma and afflictions. The suchness is not altered in any way by that. So here, there is a little bit of commentary from Geshe Loden. So let me go to that. Hope you don't mind me sharing these. I think it's kind of useful because it's a bit of a hard book to find, and I don't know if you all have it, so I thought I would share the passages from that. So his commentary on that verse, he says, space pervades all worlds of the desire, form, and formless realms. It is said to be subtle because it is non-material and not an object directly apprehended by sense consciousnesses. It is not affected by material forms, atoms, and so on. Like that, Buddha nature pervades all sentient beings, but is not affected by delusions and so on because it is pure by nature. So again, we see this analogy or simile of space being used frequently in this section, and that's because this negation of obstructive contact that is never in any way altered by whatever is in that happening to the material forms that are within that negation of obstructive contact. It in itself is not affected by that. It continues to be an absence, a mere absence of obstructive contact. In the same way, the mere absence of inherent existence pervades all sentient beings, but it isn't affected by the delusions in the minds of those beings because it has that natural purity. And it says in the next slide, whoops, all worlds. Oh, I'm sorry, this is on to verse 52. Let's wait there. Okay. And just one little bit of commentary on that. Let's go back to our text. So let's go page 135. At the top of the page, just a little bit of commentary here, probably very similar to what Geshe Loden says. Space pervades this entire receptacle-like world. And yet, because it exists as the mere negation of obstructing tangibility and is therefore an unconditioned phenomenon, and because it is not an object directly held by the senses, right, because it's non-material, it is a subtle phenomenon and consequently remains untainted by the faults of this world, such as the dirt and dust that we fly through what we call space, the absence of obstructive contact or obstructing tangibility, as it's called here. Similarly, the naturally pure basic element, this non-afflicted state, pervades the minds of all sentient beings, and yet because it is not transformed or altered by karma and affliction, it remains untainted. So whatever is happening within the sphere of a sentient being's life, it's the suchness of the mind of that being is in no way impaired or impacted in any way. So let me go on to the next outline in this section, untainted by birth and destruction that are caused by the above, again, by karma and afflictions. Just as all worlds arise and disintegrate in space, similarly, the senses arise and disintegrate in the unconditioned sphere, kind of things happening within the sphere of emptiness. We've talked about this before. It's similar in regard to space. You have this unconditioned sphere of space, various things arise, senses, sense objects, and so on. All of this happens within the sphere of unobstructive contact. In every receptacle-like world, all dependent phenomena commencing from the air mandala, again, that's the wind mandala, up through the water mandala, the earth mandala, all the things that are supported within that are born in space and will be destroyed in space by the fire at the end of time and so forth. This is how Buddhism holds that these kind of eons of destruction occurs, that there's various phases and there's a huge conflagration of fire that comes and burns away an entire world system. And then it arises, you have a period of emptiness, and then it eventually arises, a new system arises, and so on. And then it abides, and then eventually it's destroyed. These 4 cycles of, again, empty, arisal, abiding, and destruction. Similarly, the senses are born and destroyed within this unconditioned and naturally pure sphere, and yet it remains unchanged by these phenomena. So again, all the various things arise within space, physically and so on, but within emptiness, everything arrives as well. So let me go to Geshe Loden's commentary. That is, again, very short, I think. Gives you a little bit of flavor of his comments on this. All worlds, universes, suns, moons, and stars depend for their existence upon space. The bases of matter, air, fire, water, and earth elements all arise within space and eventually disintegrate within space. Space, however, neither arises nor disintegrates, and nor does it depend upon the elements for its existence. Right? Because it's the container in which all of this is happening. It's not altered in any way throughout it, and it doesn't have any kind of dependence upon the elements. The elements arise within it, but it doesn't need those elements for its existence. It can exist without them. Then in the next section, he says, in like manner, the worlds of the senses arise and pass within the sphere of reality or emptiness. Without a nature of emptiness, they could not come into existence at all, and nor could they disintegrate. They are dependent arisings, and their very function depends on emptiness. So similarly, within emptiness, we have all the various experiences of beings, their sense powers, sense spheres, all of what they experience in an embodied state, and so on. All the various things that lead to that, they all arise within emptiness, in the same way that these various worlds arise within space. However, emptiness itself neither arises nor disintegrates, and is thus referred to as the sphere of the unproduced. And again, that's its immutability. The natural potential is emptiness, and in nature it is not dependent on the senses for its existence. It just remains in an unchanging state, having no arisal or disintegration. Actually, I forgot there's a rather long section on this. I went ahead and put this all in. I'll try to go through this somewhat quickly so we don't dwell too much on it. This is a verse that I've actually mentioned to you before. May have even been in the last class. I don't recall. This is his version, translation of this. This is from chapter 24 of the Fundamental Wisdom Treatise on the Middle Way by Nagarjuna, his renowned text on the Madhyamika view of emptiness. To whatever emptiness is applicable, all is applicable to that. To whatever emptiness is not applicable, all is not applicable to that. Again, the way I word it is usually, for the person for whom emptiness is possible, all is possible. For the person for whom emptiness is impossible, nothing is possible. Just kind of gets at the fact that emptiness is a requirement for things to come into existence. It's not a cause, but it is a state that allows for the transformation of phenomena to occur, those impermanent phenomena. Here, Nagarjuna is emphasizing that emptiness must necessarily be the underlying nature of all phenomena. By this underlying nature being applicable, all other things are possible. The process of production, the relationship of causes and effects, the relationship between virtue and happiness, non-virtue and suffering, nirvana and samsara, the progress on the path and the attainment of enlightenment, all of these are only possible within the context of having a nature of emptiness. And we discussed this a number of times before. If the nature of phenomena were not emptiness, none of these things would be possible. That's the last two lines of that verse. Causes would always be inherently causes and thus could not transform into effects. Transformation would be impossible. Sentient beings would be inherently deluded and could thus never progress to enlightenment. There would be no relationship between non-virtue and suffering because they would be inherently other. In all of what we talk about in terms of our teachings, none of this could happen. The causal factors of karma, virtue and non-virtue, wouldn't be able to give rise to their results because that would not be allowed within the sphere of things having inherent existence. Then he goes on to quote Nagarjuna again, same chapter, chapter 24, which is actually his chapter on the Four Noble Truths, where he says, as there are no phenomena that are not dependent arisings, there are no phenomena that are not empty. Of course, this gets at the reasoning of dependent arising, which is said to be the king of reasonings, that allows us to see that things do arise, but only in a dependent manner. They don't have an independent, inherent existence. So all phenomena are dependent arisings in the subtlest way by being merely imputed by the mind, by conceptual mind. Therefore, there are no phenomena that are not empty. His commentary on that, all phenomena exist and function as mere dependent arisings with a final nature of emptiness. No phenomenon comes into existence without a nature of emptiness. Again, emptiness is what we see from the point of view of its ultimate truth, and then the conventional truth is the dependent arising, the fact that things come into existence based on causes and conditions and parts, and then eventually the subtlest way through mere imputation on a basis. By a conceptual mind. Then continuing on chapter 24, verse 20, he says, if all these things are not empty, if all phenomena are not empty, then there's no production and no disintegration. That cannot occur. And that would imply that the Four Noble Truths, which again is the topic of this chapter of that text, could not exist for you. So the Four Noble Truths can't exist within the sphere of things not being empty. Without causes and effects having a nature of emptiness, there could be no production of new effects from causes and no disintegration of that which has been produced. This is because, were they not mere dependent arisings with a nature of emptiness, causes and effects would exist inherently, independently, by their own power, and thus they would bear no relationship to each other. Causes and effects would have no relationship at all because they're independently existing, inherently existing. Nagarjuna illustrates this by showing that in such a case, true causes could not produce true suffering, and true paths could not bring about the cessation of suffering. Again, those are the Four Noble Truths, and therefore the Four Noble Truths would not apply to us. The Buddha would not have been telling the truth in his first sermon at Deer Park. So without there being a nature of emptiness, phenomena could neither be produced nor disintegrate. Okay. By the way, and I noticed that I forgot to change the verse. This is one of my other little things that I noticed on this one. I put it in the parentheses, the brackets up there, but I forgot to change it on the bottom. So just know that when you get that revised copy, it'll have that as well. So again, this is a rather more detailed explanation from Geshe Loden, but he's really trying, I think, to take the opportunity to give a little teaching on dependent arising emptiness, to refer back to Nagarjuna's text, because this is where the view of the middle way is set out so clearly. But this is what we're talking about here, is that within the sphere of emptiness, everything arises, everything is possible, just like uncompounded space gives rise to all the various mandalas of the earth and water and wind and what have you. So too, everything, all of our sense spheres, all of our bodies, our minds, even all of this is arising within the nature of emptiness, within suchness. Again, it's not a cause per se, but it is a condition that allows for the arising of the mind. Not conditioned strictly, because it's not, again, a changing phenomenon, but it is a state. The emptiness of inherent existence is the doorway through which all of these various phenomena arise. So then we have verse 53. This is getting into being untainted by the phenomena of destruction. Just as space has never been burned by fire, right? If there's a fire in whatever space, it's not burning the space, right? Likewise, the basic element has never been burned by the fires of death, sickness, and old age, whatever these kind of fires that we're going to talk about a little bit later in more detail. These three fires, is essentially nothing that in any way changes or alters the basic nature of the mind, the suchness of the mind. So let's read the commentary here. Just as space has never been burned by fires, so suchness with defilement is not subject to destruction and has never been burnt by the fires of death, illness, and old age. Fires is in the plural and refers to the three fires. Now there's a footnote on this that, I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing. The three fires mentioned in ancient Indian texts were the mare-faced fire of the Southern Ocean, the householder fire, the all-consuming fire. I can't say much about those fires. I don't know. I didn't see any commentary that helped me to talk about it, but it actually seems that in that book I mentioned earlier that I showed you on the Kindle version, that's from Jungam Control, he says that these are actually the fire at the end of time, the fire of hell, and the natural or ordinary fire. And they correspond respectively to death, sickness, and aging. But again, there's different presentations of these three fires. I'm not as concerned about that as the fact that we're talking about, kind of just any sort of destructive force that happens with regard to our aggregates. It doesn't have any impact on the suchness of our mind or the suchness of any phenomena for that matter. So we're going to see these three fires, death, illness, and old age, again, talked about a little later. So we'll get into those in more detail. But the final sentence, the explanation on being untainted by the phenomenon destruction is therefore shorter and is dealt with first. So again, we're dealing with destruction here first, and then we'll go on to birth. And that's, again, how we had them presented on our chart as well. Right back here when we got to that page where we see that it's not destroyed and it's not born. Again, verse 53, and then the following verses that go more into it being born. Before we leave and go on to the next, let's make sure we cover what Geshe Loden says about verse 53. Again, this is the one that I think is quite short. The Sublime Continuum continues with the analogy of space as follows. Space can never be burnt by fire. Similarly, the true nature of the mind, its suchness or its Buddha potential, though it be stained by the defilements, cannot itself be harmed by the fire of sickness, the fire of aging, and the fire of death. So I think that was it, and we don't have any more commentary from Geshe Loden until we get to the next section. He doesn't comment on every verse in this, which is actually a good thing because I don't have all of that to put into the slides. But let's go back to our commentary then and can carry on with these other verses that, again, are going to help us to gain an appreciation for this topic and the immutable nature through all these various things involved in the impure state. So now we look at untainted by the phenomena of birth. The verse 154 says, Earth depends on water, water on air, and air on space. Again, when these world systems come into existence, it's said to be this air mandala that forms within space, then water forms within that, and then through the kind of movements of the water and so on, the earth arises from that. So you have these kind of mandalas of these various elements that all are arising within space. But as it says in those last two lines, space does not depend on the elements of earth, water, or I'm sorry, air, water, and earth. That's because, again, it is the mere absence of obstructive contact in which all of this is occurring. The earth mandala rests in the water mandala, water rests in air, and the air mandala rests in space. This is even how we envision when the mandala is offered, that's the Mount Meru and so on, all of these things is kind of coming within those mandalas. Unconditioned space, however, does not dwell in the spheres of air, water, and earth. And by does not dwell, we mean that it doesn't depend upon it in the same way. And that, whether there's those elements are there or not, whether the mandalas are there or not, it doesn't matter. The unconditioned space is still there. It's the absence of obstructive contact, regardless of what is in that space. Let's go on then to the phenomena that are illustrated by that example. So that's the example of what's going on with regard to these various elements, these mandalas arising within space. Similarly, the aggregates, the constituents, and sense powers. In constituents is a topic we looked at in the Heart Sutra. The 18 constituents are a way of further dividing up phenomena that exist in terms of the consciousness knowing them, the sense power that empowers you to know them, and the objects that are known. And there are said to be 6 of each of those because there's the 5 physical senses, and then there are the mental sense. So you have the consciousness is related to that, the sense power is related to those, and then the objects that are known by those. But again, all those things that arise that are part of the world we live in, the aggregates, constituents, even the sense powers themselves, are based on karma and afflictions. That's how things come into existence. Through the Buddha's teachings, everything arises from karma and afflictions. Not that it's solely karma and afflictions, but that's the propelling force that causes us to take rebirth in a particular realm, for that realm to form. This realm formed on the basis of karma that was created so that human beings could inhabit this realm according to Buddhist cosmology. Karma and afflictions, continuing, are always based on incorrect mental attention. So we have, again, the aggregates, the constituents, and the sense powers, which are kind of our manifest being in this world. The dukkha, the suffering that we experience, are based on karma and afflictions. So the aggregates, constituents, and sense powers are kind of the earth element or the earth mandala, and then that's kind of related to the karma and afflictions that are the cause of that. Those karma and afflictions are compared to the water mandala, the water element, and then the incorrect mental attention is referring to this ignorance that's at the root, the incorrect mental attention of holding things to inherently exist. That is compared to the air. So this kind of, these 3 things are just being given these 3 in the analogy, kind of what they line up with. But then as it says in the next verse, incorrect mental attention itself depends on the purity of the mind. It sounds weird. We have the purity of the mind and we have an incorrect mental attention within that. But that's, again, how that arises, is within the sphere of emptiness, the purity of the mind, the clear light nature of the mind. While the nature of the mind does not abide in all those phenomena. Again, by not abide, we mean that it's not influenced by or doesn't subsist upon those. It's there regardless. Again, we don't mean that emptiness exists in some sort of independent manner, completely apart from things. We just mean that it is unchanged in the midst of all of that. Various things arising, the incorrect mental attention that gives rise to karma and afflictions, that gives rise to our experience of the aggregates and so on. All of this is happening within the sphere of emptiness. Emptiness, again, is always related to some phenomena. It's not some big sea or soup of emptiness, as I said previously. Let's go on to look at the commentary here. Similarly, the aggregates, as summarized by afflicted ripening, and the constituents and sensory sources, such as the sense of sight, the eye sense power, dwell in their own causes, namely karma and affliction. This is why we have these bodies, why we have experiences as humans and animals and hell beings and whatever, is because our karma and afflictions have created the seeds for that to occur. Karma and affliction, such as desire, constantly dwell in the incorrect mental attention of holding to the true existence of the person and the aggregates. The aggregates are an example of phenomena other than the person, and then, of course, the person being the other thing that we hold to truly exist. So again, we have the selflessness or emptiness of the person, and the selflessness or emptiness of phenomena, which are other than the person. In this case, we're talking about the aggregates because we're mainly talking about beings and how they are arising within this world, having mental and physical components or aggregates. This incorrect mental attention abides in the natural purity of the true state of the mind. However, the ultimate truth of the mind, the emptiness of the mind, being its final mode of existence, does not dwell in any of the phenomena of karma and delusion, and so on. Again, by not dwell, we don't mean that those things don't have an emptiness. They do, but they're not kind of dependent upon it in the way that everything else arises within emptiness. Emptiness is unchanged, again, not in any way influenced by or altered by all of these things occurring. So the meaning of these two verses is that when examining karma and affliction and so on to see if they exist by way of their own nature or not, one finds not a trace of anything existing by way of its own nature. And therefore, finally, one comes to an understanding of emptiness by nature, beyond which one does not go, right? We don't negate anything beyond that. We find that things lack inherent existence, and we accept their nominal existence, their existence as mere dependent arisings, merely imputed. When one searches for the true state of this natural emptiness, one sees that it does not pass beyond natural emptiness itself, right? The emptiness of emptiness. We've spoken of this before. And therefore will never become anything else or change into karma and affliction. Because emptiness too has no inherent existence, but it is that unchanging essence that is the same regardless of the basis upon which that emptiness is being posited. Therefore, this section means that even during the impure state, emptiness by nature cannot be altered or affected by karma and affliction. It does not mean that suchness with defilement cannot be transformed into suchness without defilement by the power of the antidotes. Again, the transformation of the mind occurs, but there's no alteration or changing. Whoops, I'm sorry. How did I do that? There is no alteration of the actual emptiness or suchness of the mind. Okay, so let's look at this last paragraph here, and then I'll take it off screen. We'll talk about this a little bit more. This analysis is concentrating on the mind's emptiness by nature, its emptiness of existing by way of its own characteristics, its emptiness of true existence, its existence as a natural purity, as the true state of phenomena, and as the ultimate truth. So these are all synonyms for what we're talking about here. By doing this, one establishes incidentally that the defilements are adventitious, which again is the other main topic of this. And we're talking about the emptiness of the mind, its clear light nature. That's the main topic being set out in these 10 presentations. But incidentally, or along the way, implicitly, the defilements are adventitious because these two facts go hand in hand. As it says here, later on in the text, the 9 similes or examples, as explicitly taught in the Tathagata Essence Sutra, concentrate on establishing the defilements as adventitious, while the mind is as empty of true existence and free of elaboration is explained incidentally. Whoops. Okay. So again, this analogy that was used, we have this within space, this absence of obstructive contact. You have the ability for the air mandala to form, for the water mandala to form on that, the earth mandala. Again, these are Buddhist cosmology, but the idea is anything that arises is going to be able to do so within the sphere of there being an absence of obstructive contact, because that's what allows each of our bodies to be in the space that it occupies, right? There's a lack of obstructive contact. That is the negation that exists, that pervades everywhere, all the realms of existence. Again, it has this independent nature in the sense of it not being altered in any way, kind of requiring those things to occupy it. It is there regardless. It is an absence of obstructive contact. In the same way, emptiness, suchness, is an absence of inherent existence, which abides together with all the phenomena that it has, but all those phenomena arise within the sphere of that. It doesn't depend upon them in the sense of subsisting from them, being kind of contingent upon them. But at the same time, again, we never do talk about emptiness in a real discrete way as being separate from the phenomena that arise within it. But it's this emptiness that is unchanging, unaltered, regardless of what is going on in the phenomena in the conventional world that are arising within that emptiness. So you can have the arising of all these various impurities. That's what we're looking at again in this first section, is the impure states, being under the control of karma and afflictions, having to experience conditioned existence in all the various ways, having to deal with birth and destruction, and so on, all of the various sufferings of existence. All of this happens within the sphere of emptiness. Again, it's a workable analogy. It has, some things that are not perfect, but nonetheless, it clearly illustrates the fact that you don't have a changing nature to that emptiness, regardless of what is happening within the changing of the mind. This is what's happening as it's right at the bottom of the page, so it just doesn't kind of carry on. It goes from page to page. Let's go to 57 and 58. These are the next two verses that talk about the correspondence of the example with the phenomena, which is kind of what I just talked about. So I think we'll be able to get through this pretty quickly. The aggregates, sense resources, and constituents are to be known as like the earth, right? That's the kind of more manifest way that we see things and experience things. Where do they come from? Karma and afflictions. So the karma and afflictions of sentient beings are to be known as like the water element. Incorrect mental attention is considered similar to the air element. So we have this causal process that, again, from the ignorance that is incorrectly tending to things, believing that they inherently exist, gives rise to karma and afflictions. Then the karma and afflictions give rise to our experiences within samsara, or conditioned existence of having the aggregates and so on. And that's considered, again, incorrect mental attention is considered similar to the air element. The mind's nature, just like the space element, has no foundation and does not rest in incorrect mental attention. And no foundation, meaning it kind of doesn't have any ability to, or the necessity to kind of depend upon any of these. It's the sphere in which all of this is happening. And again, it's not some independent phenomenon. It's the thing we have to make sure we don't make a mistake on, but we acknowledge that remains, again, unchanging and unaltered, regardless of what is happening within our experiences. So let's read the commentary that Gyaltsab Je gives on this. The aggregates, summarized by afflicted ripening, and the sense resources and constituents are likened to the earth mandala because they are the fruits of karma and affliction, and because in the future they will serve as the basis for future ripening of karma and affliction. Just as the earth serves as the basis for the 4 continents and Mount Meru, again, all of these things in Buddhist cosmology. The karma and affliction of sentient beings is likened to the element of water, which acts as the basis for earth and which rests in the unstable element of air. Similarly, they serve as the basis for the afflicted aggregates, and they depend upon the unstable basis of incorrect mental attention. So they give rise to the afflicted aggregates, which are the earth element, and they arise from the air element, which is the incorrect mental attention. This incorrect mental attention, which rests in the non-existence of phenomena as they are apprehended and in the emptiness of that mode of apprehension, is likened to the element of air that is the basis for water and which rests in the element of space. So again, from within space, air arises, gives the basis for water, and then water the basis for earth. So again, space is not the foundation for all of that. Everything is happening within that. The ultimate truth nature of mind, like the element of space, does not possess a foundation to support the mode of apprehension of incorrect mental attention. It does not rest in incorrect mental attention, and so on. So again, you have this unaltered, unaffected sort of state that is the emptiness of things, which is not really kind of giving a valid support to the arisal of all these things, because it is the emptiness of inherent existence, and all of this is the exact opposite, the incorrect mental attention that adheres to inherent existence, and that gives rise to karma and afflictions, and that gives rise to our aggregates and our experiences. So it's all happening within the ultimate truth nature of the mind. But it's not, again, something that is kind of abiding in this way of having a necessity to support those various things. It exists regardless of whether those supports are there or not. Again, not in an independent way. I don't want you to get that impression at all. Okay, characteristics of the corresponding phenomena. First, characteristics of incorrect mental attention, then karma and affliction, and then their base. So, incorrect mental attention depends on the nature of the mind. Incorrect mental attention is the door for the emerging of karma and afflictions. Again, incorrect mental attention is sort of a shorthand for the ignorance at apprehending inherent existence. That rests in the emptiness of true existence, the absence of elaboration that is the nature of the mind. And within that state, incorrect mental attention opens the way for the development of karma and affliction. Therefore, the first half of this verse says that incorrect mental attention dwells in the emptiness of true existence. And the second half teaches that it serves as a basis for karma and affliction. By this, it can be established that karma and affliction are rootless and without foundation, because they too are empty of inherent existence, just like all phenomena, but they also don't have foundation in truth, because they are based on this incorrect mental attention, which is grasping at things incorrectly. I know it sounds kind of weird, but we're talking about, once more, everything has this empty nature. The emptiness of things is what even allows for the misconception of things to occur. It sounds strange, but all of our afflictions are empty of inherent existence, and they are mistaken, of course, mental attention, because they're grasping at things as if they had something that they don't have at all. Their underlying nature is emptiness of inherent existence, but yet they are grasping at that as if it were real. And so all the process begins with this incorrect mental attention that is arising within the sphere of emptiness. And then, of course, the karma and afflictions arise in the sphere of that emptiness, but are also without foundation because they are also in error. They're not seeing that fundamental nature, the emptiness of the mind. And then, of course, the aggregates, all the various experiences, sense spheres, everything arises from within that. So that's the kind of correspondence, again, that we're looking at in regard to this. Let's go on to the next verse that continues this. Characteristics of karma and affliction. Oops. Click. There we go. From karma and afflictions, which again are like the water mandala or water element, aggregates, sense resources, and constituents derive. That becomes the earth element, but they have the support of the water. Just as the water element springs up and vanishes, they too arise and disintegrate. So again, things, karma and afflictions arise, disintegrate, they're changing phenomena, but they're arising within a dependence upon their previous, the support, which is the incorrect mental attention, and then they give rise to the aggregates and so on. So from karma and afflictions, in the form of substantial cause and contributory cause. Again, the substantial cause is the karma, and the afflictions are the contributory cause, and which are likened to the water mandala, will come the ripened aggregates, sense resources, and constituents. As the water mandala is destroyed and formed, so the ripened aggregates, etc., are destroyed and formed by the force of karma and affliction. Right, so you have different aggregates. We have aggregates in this life that are, again, our physical form, as well as, even though mind has some continuity from life to life, that mind takes on shape on the basis of the physical form that we have, right? There's a human mind that's very different from the mind that's together with the physical form of a dog or a cat or what have you. So we have these aggregates that are conditioned and that are continually arising on the basis of karma and afflictions. They're born, and of course they cease. They're destroyed at the end of this life when we go on to the next existence. Now again, we're not saying mind is utterly destroyed so that you never have mind. Mind is a continuous phenomenon that has existed since beginningless time and will exist in perpetuity. There's nothing that can destroy mind because mind is not physical. It's kind of got an interesting parallel to what we're talking about in regard to suchness, but nonetheless, it still has various experiences. Our minds go through, again, the states of these existences and all of what's arising within the mind. That's because, again, mind has that changing nature, whereas suchness doesn't change at all. Characteristics of their base, again, so that we're kind of working our way down, we get to the base of all of this. Just like the element of space, so too the nature of the mind lacks causes and conditions, because the emptiness of the mind is just like space. It's a negation, and therefore it has no causes and conditions. It's a mere negation. It lacks the collection of causes and conditions. It therefore has no arising, disintegration, and abiding in this way, in this manner that we talk about. We can say that, yes, there's the emptiness of the cup when the cup is formed, and it abides with the cup until the cup is destroyed. But the emptiness, the suchness, is not destroyed or arising. It just is there at the moment when the phenomenon that it's related to is there. It has this unchanging nature again throughout that. So let's look at his commentary on that. Like the element of space, devoid of birth and destruction, the ultimate truth nature of the mind lacks a substantial cause and has no contributory causes. There is no coming together of causes and circumstances to produce it. It has no birth, no final destruction, and nor does it remain in existence by the power of causes. Okay, so again, causes don't have any effect on it. It's abiding in its own state, regardless of being, again, it's just a pure negation of inherent existence. This subject of the basic element's inability to be changed by karma and affliction has been taught only briefly and by summary, and there is no extensive explanation in the commentary, meaning a Sangha's commentary. The thinking behind this is that these two alone provide an understanding. Moreover, if it cannot be transformed by birth and destruction, then it's easy to understand how it cannot be transformed by karma and affliction. All these various things, again, that are happening within the sphere of conventional reality of our own existences and the various manifestations of our lives in this particular existence and going on to another one. All of this sort of show is happening within emptiness. The emptiness, the suchness of the mind that carries through all of that is unaltered, regardless of what play is going on, what movie is showing. We got the movie of a human being that we're in, whatever act of, who knows how long it lasts. And then next life we'll have another, movie that'll be the movie of something else. What's all on the same screen, the screen of emptiness, that's all being projected, as a sort of manifesting within that. We don't have a changing nature to that. What changes is the movie that we're involved in. And obviously we want to change to the movie of a Buddha eventually, where we can live out the rest of our existence in that state. So now we have a little bit of a summary again in this verse 62, and then we have two more verses that we'll look at and conclude this section. Unchanged by karma and affliction. We kind of return to this to some degree. The mind's nature of clear light is unchanging, just like space. Those adventitious stains, such as desire, which derive from wrong concepts, do not afflict the emptiness of the mind. So in the same way that space is not transformed by the particulars of the environment, so the clear light, ultimate truth nature of the mind is not changed in its entity by the afflictions. Because the adventitious defilements, such as desire, which arise from wrong concepts of holding to true existence, do not afflict it. It's not tainted in any way by all of that. So I think this is pretty clear, this summary, because it's what we've been talking about all night. So let's go forward then. We're going to skip this next section and go to the next page, which is page 139. And we're going to go specifically to this next outline that's on the screen there, link to the next section, unchanged by birth and destruction. This is, again, that final little section that we had on the outline. Let me go back to the outline just to show you. So we have here, we've been through all of this. We can now get this link to the next section, which is the final bit that is just this one verse 64. This is unchanged by birth and destruction. So we essentially get these three here. Remember how I said there's those three that we saw them at the beginning earlier on when we looked at the chart that was prepared. We have unchanged by karma and affliction, unchanged by destruction, and unchanged by birth. So we're going to get one little kind of comment on this and then an additional verse that kind of concludes this topic to show how there is no changing, no alteration of the Buddha nature, the suchness of the mind, regardless of what impurities are arising in terms of our experience. So in terms of this link, it says this begins from the lines, just as these examples of space, referring to the fact that although the outside world is born and destroyed, space remains unaffected by birth and destruction. So it is true that suchness in its nature is not subject to change because it is permanent and unconditioned. However, here the meaning of unchanging is as explained previously, and the footnote essentially says what I've been saying, that we're not talking about it necessarily in terms of it being not changing moment by moment. We mean it doesn't change from one state to the next, from the impure state to the impure and pure state, then finally to the pure state. It's similar because obviously if it doesn't change in those ways, it doesn't change moment by moment. But nonetheless, this is the main point that's being driven home here, is that we don't have a changing of the suchness as we go through this development, but the development does occur and is changing. The reason for explaining it this way, Gyaltsab Je says, is because suchness never goes beyond the state of natural emptiness, the ultimate condition of all existence, and no one and nothing can transform it into something else. Therefore, this presentation is for those who wish to abandon the afflictions and to understand the true nature of reality, to understand it this way. So I found it kind of interesting. It says, it does not transform, right? It says right there, nothing can transform it into something else. Yet it's kind of interesting. Way back when we did the definition of Buddha lineage, way back at the beginning, right? Remember this from the first class? We said that it is a phenomenon that is suitable to transform into a Buddha's exalted body. I mean, I'm just put that up there because I find it kind of, we use these words like transform or change, but we do mean that, again, the suchness of the mind that is the naturally abiding lineage or Buddha nature does transform into the nature truth body. And the nature truth body is, again, it has two things. It has natural purity, which is the suchness of the mind prior to that, but it also has the adventitious purity. But essentially, we mean that suchness kind of continues. It's not transformed in and of itself, even though we use that definition, right? That it's suitable to transform into a body of a Buddha. Well, if the suchness of the mind that is the naturally abiding lineage becomes the nature truth body, in a sense, that element of natural purity, well, then there is a transformation that occurs. But it's interesting because it's mainly occurring on the basis of the transformation in the mind, the attainment of that purity of the adventitious defilements. It's not really transforming in itself. It's kind of the point that's being made in this part of the text. But that's unchanging nature is referring to one thing. The ability for it to transform into the nature truth body is kind of a different thing. Again, it's two different bases in a sense, but it's still the continuity of the mind from the unenlightened state to the enlightened state. To conclude this section, nirvana, the state of freedom beyond suffering, is also permanent, but do not go in search of the traditions of others who believe, again, in this idea of functional but permanent phenomena existing as self-sustaining affirmation. I'm not even going to be able to explain much more on that. He's just saying, know that this is what we're talking about, this permanent phenomena that is this suchness, that is nirvana, and so on. Don't think that it's something else, that it's got some functionality to it. Here's the root verse that pertains to that whole explanation we just went through. Neither do karma and afflictions, again, likened to water and so on, produce the basic element, nor will it be burned by the intolerable fires of death, sickness, and old age. So the coming together of karma and affliction, which is likened to the water mandala, will not produce this suchness with defilement, because it remains unaffected by the phenomenon of birth. Again, suchness is there. It's not in any way affected or altered or transformed by what is arising within suchness. It will not be burnt by the fires of death, illness, and old age, which are unceasing in their creation of great suffering, because it remains unaffected by the phenomenon of destruction. The two halves of the verse teach the lack of birth and destruction. Okay, so he says this is the first of the two commentary-like verses, but I think there's no harm in including them in the summary. The last of these is going to be found some pages from now. We're going to skip a whole bunch of this, go all the way to the last page of this section, page 142. Okay, so we get this final outline: unchanged by old age, etc., destroyer of the aggregates and likened to fire. So there's a link. The link says, actually, I'm going to skip the link. I think it's kind of going to be explained as we go through this, because again, the link often like talks about Asanga's commentary and quotes it, and it's kind of piecemeal. Let's go to the root verse, 64. The fire at the end of time, fire of hell, and ordinary fire. These are the three fires that, again, Jamgon Kongtrul said, which are different from the one in the footnote when we saw the three fires earlier, should be understood in this order as being similar to the three fires of death, sickness, and old age. So just as within space, when we talk about these worlds arising, we can talk about the fire at the end of time, which occurs at the end of that eon of destruction and so on, when the entire thing is consumed, and then the fire of hell, and which causes a more kind of sustained suffering within an existence, and then ordinary fire, which is kind of just a condition that we deal with throughout our lives. The three fires of death, illness, and old age should be known respectively as being like the fire at the end of time, burning all external worlds, because that consumes our life, right? At the end of this life, when we have to experience death, this life is over. It's consumed by that fire of death. The fires of hell, burning the hell being's body. So again, the fires of hell are like an illness that you have in that particular state of a hell being. And then the ordinary wood burning fire, destroying as they do one's body, one's health, and one's youth. You know, that we have our youth consumed by the fire of old age. That's like the wood burning fire. So again, those are some correlations. I don't know how important they are to know about. Let's just see the rest of this commentary and finish this off. There are three reasons why death, illness, and old age are like fire. Death destroys permanently the six sensory sources belonging to the person. Illness brings about a variety of sufferings, and old age is the complete ripening of the fruits of karma and affliction. Look on this text as a teaching to think about the disadvantages of samsara, to raise one's mind to renunciation, and to develop the mind that strives for liberation. So it's kind of interesting. I'm going to skip the rest of this, by the way, and next week we'll start on this page, page 143, the immutable during the impure and pure state. But it's kind of interesting. He uses this last little topic like to meditate on how we are plagued by these three fires of death, illness, and old age, to kind of develop our renunciation. Of course, renunciation is always bigger than just those grosser forms of suffering. Remember, we also have to renounce what we call our suffering of change, which is the pleasant experiences that we have. In fact, my teacher in Italy, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, he always emphasized how renunciation doesn't really happen until we renounce those. You know, we can still keep deluding ourselves into thinking, samsara is not so bad. Yeah, I'll renounce all the horrible things, the death and the illness and all these various things I have to experience. But I'm not going to renounce my delicious, latte or whatever you have. Thank you very much. All those things are also in the nature of dukkha. And of course, then we have to get the subtlest level of dukkha, the pervasive condition suffering, which is that as long as we're under the control of karma and delusions, we're going to suffer. We're going to have that conditioning. So, wow, right at 8:30 here, 8:30 here. Actually, 8:30 there. My computer still shows the time in Mountain Time Zone, which kind of keeps me on track here. It's 10:30 here, as it is where Sean is. So let's go ahead and see if there are maybe one or two questions, and then we'll go into the discussion group for about 20 minutes. Any questions? Yes, Stephen.
Thanks for taking my question, Don.
Sure.
I guess this goes back to, well, I had a few, but I'll keep it short. Page 137, characteristics of incorrect mental attention. Are we talking about inappropriate attention here? You know, for example, when we have a feeling and then we start looking at it like a positive, negative, or neutral feeling, and then looking at it, and then along with afflictions and making it like worse and worse and dwelling on it and turning it into
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact Tibetan term that's being translated here as incorrect mental attention, but I think it's in the same vein as what we often say is inappropriate mental attention. Or but kind of included in that are two things. Of course, there's the grosser errors that we're making, such as when we hear beautiful music that we like, we think the beauty is there for everyone to hear, right? Oh, listen to this beautiful song, and you play it for some people, and they go, I don't really care for it. And then we show other people, and maybe they're just unaffected one way or another. They're like, oh, I could take it or leave it. Everybody, has a particular way that we embellish objects with these kinds of qualities that we think are there for everyone to see. But then we get even to the deeper level of its mere existence as music, as whatever, as being inherently there. So there's kind of layers of errors that we're making. Oftentimes that, like when we get attachment involved, then obviously we are overlaying the pleasantness of objects, making them even more beautiful and delightful than what they are, right? So we think, oh, this is the best music I've ever heard, and we enjoy it immensely. But we've created that ourselves, because again, not everybody who hears that hears the same thing. So I think there's kind of two levels to it. And oftentimes we talk about that inappropriate mental attention as being that grosser level, but under the surface thing is the incorrect mental attention that, as was identified in the text, it's the grasping at inherent existence that
Mhm.
is driving that whole process. As I said, once we think the object inherently exists, then we also think the qualities inherently exist, and we think even the exaggerated qualities inherently exist within the object. Anyway, does that help to
It
explain?
does a lot, Don, and that kind of is borne out by the verse, the way it divides it into two.
Hmm.
I might quibble with it, saying that, yeah, is the appearance of inherent existence, is it like a form of attention, or is it just something that's kind of baked into the way we perceive things?
The appearance of inherent existence.
Yeah.
Again, that's a part of the causal process because everything that appears to us has that false appearance. Lama Zopa Rinpoche often talks about kind of how when we first start learning what things are, again, there might be some lack of that happening in a very gross way. I mean, it's happening in a subtle way, but we kind of learn a label for something, such as when we learn the label for book or whatever when we were quite young and our parents said, oh, I want to read you a book. And you're like, oh, book, you've never seen a book before. You learn the label, you hear the label, that's the first step on a basis. And there's always a basis there. Like it would be impossible, I think, to explain to a child what a book is without giving them the thing that is labeled as book. And then once you get that, there is a almost immediate appearance of the book as existing from its own side because of the stains of inherent existence, a conception of inherent existence that we have in our minds that rise up almost instantly. So once we've learned the label for it, it's as if the label absorbs into the base and now exists out here. Its bookness is established as being independently existing by the mere appearance. The mere appearance is kind of reifying that book. And then the third step is we grasp at it as real. We're not, we buy into the false appearance. We believe in the false appearance. So Rinpoche often talks about that being the threefold process. It's merely designated initially, kind of in a sense, but the very second after, the label that we've given it absorbs into it and appears back to us as if it's real, as if it's from its own side. And then we grasp at that as real through our ignorance. And so that's how we get in trouble. But so the appearance is a factor in it, but the appearance itself, remember, is arising from the imprints, the knowledge obscurations, which are the imprints of having this conception of inherent existence that give rise to a false appearance. The false appearance isn't out there, though, it's in our minds. That's not to say that, when the book is having, I'm kind of doing it this way as if, the false appearance is out here. It appears to us through the filter of this false appearance to be real from its own side, to have that inherent existence. And then we think that's real. Okay.
I was just hoping Sean would ask his question. I could
Oh,
ask it
sure.
for you.
Please do.
Well, I was just there was a lot of questions that were coming up, but one of them was why, when they were talking about these elemental mandalas,
Mhm.
why was fire left out?
I think in the way that the Mount Meru is put together, I don't know that there's a fire mandala in there. I have to go back and look. Um, Fire is a force that obviously affects evolution of various world systems and what have you, because you can't have that without, a fire element. Of course, they often say that even within any particular element, all the other elements are also there in a non-manifest way because these things aren't meant to be seen as discrete, independently existing as earth, water, fire, what have you. But let me go back and look at it and see, if I can go back to my Abhidharma teachings and kind of take a look at some of that.
I was also interested if there was an explanation of how. So, in the physical world, with
Mhm.
space being not physical,
Right.
so if it's not physical, then is it mind or is it?
Well, again, we have to, I think that we can say that, like when we look up in the sky, some people will say, "Well, I see space," or I see even like at nighttime when you see the darkness of the sky, if you're in a place where you're away from city lights and you see all of the stars and what have you. I mean, we can say that we see space in a sense because we see an absence of stuff that allows us to kind of get to the stars and all the things that are up in the heavens and whatever. But again, we have to keep going back to this idea of uncompounded space, which is the mere absence of obstructive contact. And that's what we call space that is all around us. There are physical they actually do talk in the text about compounded space. Like if we talk about a cup that has the space within it, the walls of the cup. So it's kind of the space that is abiding there, or even like the space that I'm making with my hand here, that is kind of abiding within the curving of my fingers around that. It's you can say that there's sort of these composed spaces where we are kind of limiting the space to some degree through what is happening in the physical world. But that's not what we're really talking about here. We're not talking about those kinds of composed things. We're talking about an uncomposed space, an uncompounded space, which is this mere negation.
But
That
I
is,
guess the difficulty I was having was like it was talking about all these elements dissolve into that uncompounded space, but
we don't,
then but
yeah.
then they can arise again. Like what are they? How are they arising if everything is gone?
Well, because not everything is gone. I mean, again, we can say that in this empty eon, that there still is the potential for worlds to come back into existence. um, as long as there is, I mean, you can never really completely destroy matter, right? I don't think, you know, essentially
Yeah,
things always are converting into something else. So the
it's
potential
just
is
more
there.
subtle.
Yeah. But, Buddhist cosmology is a weird sort of, I don't know
Doesn't
what to call it,
doesn't
weird
quite
animal.
fit.
It's hard to put it together with sort of Western views of science and cosmology and how things form,
And the
but
the one other question I had, which I think I know the answer, but my mind was getting all in knots, was so when they say that emptiness is a permanent phenomenon,
Mhm.
in reference to if the mind is the base and the mind is changing moment by moment, so it's impermanent. So that would make the emptiness of those moments of mind impermanent, but between moments it would be the same, I guess. Like the emptiness isn't different between moment one and moment two. Um,
Yeah,
in that sense, is it permanent? Like,
I mean, what we tend to do is to not go down to this necessarily to this level of like individual moments of mind that obviously are changing. That's what we mean by impermanent, is having momentary change. And yes, we could, I suppose, identify a unique emptiness that is in this moment and the next moment and so on. We get down to those, like they say, it's 1/65th of a finger snap or something, is what they
right.
say in Buddhist um, delineation of these individual moments. If you said that there's an emptiness pertaining to each of those 65ths of a of a moment, well then, I guess you could say that we give some uniqueness to those, but within that period of time, they themselves are unchanging. And they won't change from individual moment to moment in terms of them being a negation of inherent existence, even while all of that. But we tend to pull back from that and just talk about the emptiness of the mind. We don't talk about individual moments quite so much, but just to say that while there is mind, there is always the emptiness of the mind. The emptiness of the mind doesn't change while the mind is changing momentarily. Our minds go through.
Right. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of my electrical engineering I did at Georgia Tech, where you have a signal wave and you can talk about it in discrete moments, but it's still a wave.
Right.
It's a continuous wave.
And I mean, it's not to say that there aren't these individual moments, but when you get down to that level of kind of looking at things, again, we don't find anything to kind of latch onto, if you will. And so we're going to, even with mind, of course, what is there to latch onto in a more, analytical way? But I'm just saying, we call it the phenomenon that we call mind, that has this continuity from beginningless time all the way into Buddhahood and beyond, or not beyond Buddhahood, but, into infinity, that is together with its emptiness. And that emptiness is unchanging because it's always the negation of inherent existence. Whereas the contents of the mind are going to change moment by moment, as well as through all of these existences and into Buddhahood. I mean, we can even say the mind of a Buddha changes because the manifestations of that mind change, right? The form bodies that are appearing and the ways that the activities are taking place in realms of existence. And so it's kind of interesting. But yeah, there's a changing nature even of these moments. But when we talk about the continuity of the emptiness of these moments, we would still have a unchanging nature that is not
the mind stream versus the moments of mind.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do a little discussion so that we don't waste this opportunity. Again, what I had put together for you all, I'll put it on the screen, but it was just essentially to go through the points that are on the chart, which again are kind of what I'm focusing on. The 9th presentation, what purpose does it serve? Particularly in relation to the 3 states that were previously discussed. This is the kind of related to that final column on the chart. And then in regard to the section of the text pertaining to the first of the 3 states, the impure state, again, which is one of the 3 that you'd be identifying in the first question. What are the 3 main points discussed in regard to the immutability of the Buddha essence during this first state? What is the simile that is used to explain this? What are the correspondences that are set out in relation to those 3 main points? Good enough? All right. So I'm just going to hang back and try to let you discuss without me getting too involved. So, okay. So discuss. I'll turn off my mic. All right. Well, let's conclude tonight then. Thank you for the stimulating discussion. Yeah. And I think, again, these topics are not horribly complex. So, and this one just had, again, all of the stuff that had to do with all of these various analogies and things, the simile of the various mandalas and that. So I'll let you kind of work with that on your own over the next week. So next week, again, we'll begin with that. I meant to say before Shayla left, just so you know, next week I will be back in Santa Fe, of course, and do the class there. But then there's 2 weeks right after that where I won't be teaching at all because I'm traveling, doing a teaching tour, and just didn't really work timing wise for me to do that. So we'll have a little break, and I'm hoping to actually, if I can, get through, I don't know if I will, all 10 presentations, but at least the 9th one, so that we can end with some good chunk of stuff done, and you can maybe spend the next 2 weeks just relaxing or reviewing, whatever.
But is that when you're going to be in Raleigh?
Yeah, I'll be in Raleigh. At first, I'm in New York City at the Brooklyn Center there, and then I'll be down. What are you teaching
in Raleigh?
Let me take it off here. Well, I'm teaching a couple of evening topics that are just more, kind of, one has to do with conscious aging, another with, I can't remember the other one, on Sunday morning, I'm doing a thing on gratitude. But the weekend course will be the more interesting thing. That's Tsongkhapa's Praise of Dependent Arising that many of us were reciting for Rinpoche after he passed away. So it's a nice little like 58 verse text that I'll be teaching from Friday night through Sunday afternoon. But again, Sunday morning, they do a more general class. So that'll be the teaching on gratitude. So it's like 4 sessions. We'll see if I get through all 58 verses. I doubt it, but
Well, I better not show up or you won't.
his that's okay. His Holiness, actually, I received teachings from His Holiness, and His Holiness kind of did a similar thing where, they do this all the time. Like they start off with a huge commentary on like the initial verses, and then like in the last session, the last 20 minutes, you get like 40 verses.
Right.
And it just kind of reads them through and goes, yeah, well, this is basically that. And then he summarizes a lot. So anyway, I'll probably have to do something similar.
Have to
But
come
yeah,
back.
questions do take up time, obviously, but I like to have that chance, and it's good for people to have questions somewhat answered. I don't know how good I do all the time, but anyway, let's recite these 2 verses of dedication. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And for His Holiness, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Whoops, went too far. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And just quickly dedicate for those you're holding in your heart right now, whatever suffering those beings are experiencing, send this positive energy out to them so they become free from it immediately and find all the causes that will lead them to true peace and happiness. And may this be so for all beings through what we've done here tonight. All right, thank you all. I appreciate you being here. Like I said,
Thank you, Don.
This has been
Good to
fun
see
in
you
some
again,
ways
Sean.
to do a Zoom teaching for a couple of classes, because it did feel more intimate and connected in some way than it does in the Gompa sometimes. So, but I'll be back there next week. So, okay.